You are live.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Audit Committee meeting for the month of July 2021. It appears that we have a quorum with Alderwoman Tierney, Alderwoman Pendell Charles, myself, Katie George, and Jim Cardillo are all present. I expect Julia to be here in just a little bit. The first order of business, well, we just took care of the first order of business. It's a roll call. Has everybody had the opportunity to review the audit committee agenda for today? And if so, do I hear any motions?
I move that we approve today's agenda.
Second.
All right, is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed signify by saying no. All right, it appears that we have unanimously approved the audit committee agenda for today. The review and approval of the audit committee minutes from the last meeting will be deferred until our next meeting. We're joined by Alderman Ross Arnett. Good morning, Ross.
Morning.
Okay. Our next matter on the agenda is educational topics and speakers. This morning we have with us Forest Consulting, from Forest Consulting, or Lee Crumbaugh and Jim Stockdale. Wait a minute, names have disappeared from my.
It's Jim Stockmall.
Yes, Stockmall. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the audit committee.
Good morning.
Morning.
The floor is yours.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I said the floor is yours.
Floor. Okay. Do I have the ability to share my screen, Alderman?
Yes, sir, you do.
Fantastic.
Members of the committee, if you don't mind, we will at least try to save the questions till the end.
So Jim and I were engaged a number of months ago to work with a set of 12 departments and offices in helping the offices assess their current performance measures and learn more about measuring performance, and then to the extent that they wanted our help, to help the offices create a new set of measures for fiscal 23. Jim and I were engaged because both of us are past presidents of the Association for Strategic Planning, and ASP's body of knowledge sets out how to measure and manage performance. So we're pretty deeply steeped in this stuff. Today, we're going to talk to you about what has been achieved in working with the departments and what the results are. And then we're going to offer you a slice of performance measurement and management training, so that in your role as the audit committee and as members of the council, you know what you're going to be seeing from the departments and offices, and you can use that information in efforts to make city government more effective. Jim, do you want to add anything to that preface?
No, that's fine, Lee.
Okay. All right. So we worked with these 12 departments and offices. And so we reviewed with them, we reviewed ourselves and then shared with them our review of the measures they previously developed. We provided training to staff from all of those offices and departments. And then 7 of the 12 came back to us to help them in their in setting new performance measures for the departments and offices. So what we learned, and by the way, some of this, when we previously met with the audit committee, we shared this with you, but we thought it was important to review it. We learned that many objectives instead were stated as though they were projects or activities to complete. Many goals were written like objectives, and many measures addressed activities and projects, not objectives. Now, that might seem confusing, but I think after we take you through the training, you'll see better what we discovered. The benchmarks were mostly internal targets, whereas benchmarks in the best practices world of performance measurement are things external, like ISO fire ratings or response times. Often only one
Hey,
measure.
Lee,
Yes,
can you let them know that you'll share these slides with them?
absolutely, Lynn.
Yeah, yeah.
You will have
I
this.
see Alderwoman Tierney taking pictures of the screen, so.
Well, she just likes the photos I'm using, that's all.
Thank you.
We'll make sure you get the slides.
Okay,
Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome.
of course. Often only one measure was used to track progress in accomplishing an important objective. And again, best practices are to use multiple measures. And if you can, a leading measure and a lagging measure. Again, this will become more apparent in the training portion of this. Most of the measures were input, meaning what's being invested in something, intermediate output, meaning where are we in producing something, and output, what have we produced, so to speak. But there were many opportunities to add measures of accomplishments. What was the outcome? Did the tree fall in the forest, and was it important? In most cases, the trend of the performance measure was not reported. So how was performance versus last year, for example? Is the trend negative or positive? And then most departments did report on their measures as they planned, which was good. Jim, anything you want to add to this slide?
No, Lee, I think there's some more stuff coming up.
Yeah, there are. When we worked with the department heads and staff for the various departments, at least from our assessment, clarity was gained on the differences between goals, objectives, benchmarks, targets, and the actual performance measures. And the importance or the value of using multiple measures that lead, they show where performance might go, or lag, what the history is, mixing those, they learn the value of that and the value of measuring what's been accomplished, the outcome. And they saw how to make performance data more meaningful through trending and visualization. We'll talk about that in the training. And then they learned how to assess potential measures and pick the best measures for the given objective. And we gave them a tool to do that, and we'll show you that tool along the way here. So in creating their measures, the departments reviewed their measures, in many cases, reset goals and objectives. They assessed potential measures, including the ones they had been using, and they picked the best measures for the given objective. And as I said, in a little over half the cases, they called us in to help them or advise them on their efforts. Now, we were not actually asked to assess the final measures, but to the extent that we have seen the new goals, objectives, benchmarks, targets, and measures, departments are more attuned to the difference between goals, objectives, and projects. Some of the previous measures for which departments had difficulty obtaining data or had little control over the outcome, those were dropped. And that's kind of a major tenet here, that if you can't get good information, or if even though you're measuring something, if you don't have really influence over it, don't bother. Focus on what you can get data for and what you can influence. And there are now a greater mix of leading and lagging measures. We have to state, as we stated last time, that a shortfall is the city does not have an overarching current strategic plan, goals and objectives, strategies that would enable the departments to align their goals and objectives with the city's overall goals and objectives, and thereby more directly promote achievement of the city's goals.
Hey, Lee, if I can add one component,
Of
was
course.
in many cases, because of COVID-19 and the pandemic, a lot of the activities they had planned to do, which was part of their objective setting and the measures they were tracking, were engaging with various components of the city, whether it was recruiting for the police office or doing a lot of other kinds of outreach, and they couldn't do that. So they were reporting zero activities on those things because of the pandemic. And through that process, they were able to really rethink what they were going to try to measure going forward.
Yes. Okay, in the training, and we're trying to make this expeditious because we know you have other things on your agenda. We're going to talk about the key questions that performance measurement answers. We'll describe the process for you. We'll offer thoughts on writing strategic objectives and on developing measures and targets. And then we'll show you how to evaluate and select the performance measures to actually use, and how you document those measures, and then how you can visualize the performance of the unit or the entity. And then finally, stepping up to your role as audit committee, city council, how you can use performance measurement in a performance management system. So the questions that performance measurement answers are: how much work is the organization doing? That's output. How efficiently is the work being performed? That's efficiency. What benefits are being derived from the work? A key question, and that's outcome. And how satisfied are customers with the organization's services? That also is outcome. How are resources being allocated? That's input. And then how well are initiatives, projects, and programs being managed? And those would be project management measures. Okay, there's 5 phases to this process. And never fear, in a few minutes, I'm going to have Jim take the wheel, and you don't have to listen to me for the whole presentation. You first of all described the desired outcome or objective. So why are you doing this? What do you want to change or impact or create that's meaningful? And then describe the most appropriate measure or measures or indicators that capture the outcome, either directly if possible or indirectly if necessary. And then describe the desired level of performance. What are your targets and thresholds? And use benchmarking when you can, meaning what's good or desirable or appropriate given what the outside world and other organizations have achieved, promote, have validated as a desirable target. And then collect, evaluate, and report the actual performance data. and then transform that data into information that's easy to understand so that the people in the organization who need it for better decision making can understand it. And then again, use that benchmarking information. The idea is over time to drive continuous improvement in the organization. Jim, I'm going to toss the ball to you.
Sure. So as that first step Lee talked about, you describe what you're trying to accomplish in terms of that outcome. And the standard or best practice is it should be in a verb and object format, meaning, and you want to choose verbs that kind of promote a continuous improvement of that area of performance that you're trying to measure. So words like improve, increase, reduce, decrease, strengthen. And we'll show you a couple examples as you scroll through this. So increase revenue may not reduce waste, improve service quality, improve access to the services, improve brand awareness might be something you would have, or improve citizen experience, if you will. Not so good examples include train all employees. That's an activity, right? Maybe the better way to set that objective is improve knowledge and skills. Another example might be not redesigning the website, again, which is just an activity, but improve citizen communications might be a better way to do that. And so the city had chosen to use one way of measuring performance using a key term called key performance indicator. So it's a measure that you should have data on that helps you quantify, what you're trying to achieve, that outcome that you're seeking for. And what we like to see is having those KPIs translate those high-level goals and objectives that you're setting for your office or departments into meaningful measures. And as Lee mentioned, we look for a blend of leading and lagging indicators. Typically, lagging indicators show what has been accomplished, but if you have things that are leading, it could help you understand how you're progressing towards achieving those long-term outcomes. We always talk about focusing on the vital few, and that's why we put together the tool for the departments and the offices to choose which ones they think are the best ones for what they're trying to achieve and accomplish. So how do you do that? So that second step in terms of identifying the measures, brainstorm what those intended results are. Now, for some of the departments like fire, there's some standards that they always have to track, so response time, for example, as we mentioned before when we first met with you. Same thing on police. But what about human resources? Are there some standards that you're trying to achieve for the HR department or the emergency management department? And in some cases, like with the overdoses, there are shared objectives across many different departments. And so you want to take that into consideration as well. You evaluate that potential indicator or KPI. We'll get into a little bit. In some organizations, because things are very complicated, like say understanding citizen satisfaction with all the services that the city may provide, or business services to the businesses in the city, a composite index may be needed. It gets complicated, and we really just provided the departments, the offices, training in that, but we don't expect that would be the norm for Annapolis. Then we'll show you a way to document all the information and how you determine appropriate targets. And again, sometimes that's informed by external benchmarks, sometimes that's determined by previous performance on those areas that you've had over the last several quarters or several years. So one of the things that we try to get is take people out of the normal thinking and ask the question, what would people see, hear, feel, or do if the objective's outcome were actually happening? How do you make this visceral? How do you make this not just a static number? Or what differences would you notice? things that are happening in the environment on say from a resilience standpoint. What would you notice compared to now if you're actually achieving some of those objectives that you're trying to improve? In the case of say crime, is crime going down? That's a difference you would notice if you had an objective to focus on that. And then we always say, try to prioritize those measures on outcomes over those inputs, throughputs, and outputs, which are also, and those outcomes sometimes are the most challenging ones to do, but we try to focus on that. Step 2 is, okay, is the indicator valid? That means, do you have data for that particular performance indicator? Does it add value to you to make decisions about how you're operating the department or the offices? And we use those 2 questions as the primary filter. Is it easy to track? I mean, do you have to have an army of people going out and collecting data, manually tabulating that, and then maybe putting into a spreadsheet? Or can you get the data off of your existing systems like they do in fire in terms of response time? So if you can have real live feeds from your regular systems that the city operates, that's probably a good thing to do. Is the team held to an appropriate level of accountability, meaning they can control how that performance indicator is operating, or is it really outside of their control? You've probably got some water quality kinds of things. That's really hard to control. You can do things as a city, but there's a lot of actors that affect water quality, for example. Does the indicator communicate a positive message to the office or department, meaning they know things are moving forward? Does it communicate a positive message to your citizens and your businesses? And then the last kind of way to evaluate is a lagging and leading indicator. And we'll show you an example of that.
You're doing good, Jim. Keep it up.
So, I mentioned satisfaction or loyalty. There's intangibles, and you may have to put together several measures into an index. And they could address different dimensions of the entire result. Sometimes you can get a little bit more complicated by weighing the various measures in terms of its influence. And we'll give you an example as we come up. So, I've helped organizations develop composite indexes. When Lee and I were running the Association for Strategic Planning, it just didn't work for us because we didn't have the data at the same time we needed it. For example, we were trying to measure something called a net promoter score. And that was a combination of anything our members did. They took a webinar, they liked it, or they didn't like it. They went to our annual conference. They couldn't find information on our website. We tried to put together, some composite scores for, how satisfied they were with their membership and the services we were providing. It was very challenging for us. So I can understand and I can, empathize with any organization who are trying to do this. 4th step is to document. Now, some of your measures aren't this complicated. You don't need to create a complex formula for calculating the indicator, but we'll show you an example of what we mean. You want to make sure you know the source. Like I said, if you have an automated feed from an existing system, that's always great. If anytime you have fat finger potential for errors, it kind of creates challenges down the way, knowing if you're on track or not. You want to set a baseline for that information. And if you do have an external benchmark, like say the fire department does for some of their measures, you want to make sure you identify that. Most people are reporting things in the frequency that makes sense for their particular department or office. For example, fire is reporting things daily, on the hour, hourly, because of the way that they're responding to things as they occur. In the information technology division, they may not be doing that, although they do have data about uptime and all that kinds of stuff, but they may not report that on a daily basis to the external or the audit committee, but maybe they'll do that on a quarterly or semi-annual basis.
The same contrast between police and the Office of Law, right? Very different rhythm to their reporting.
Which is okay. So it's important from an audit committee perspective, in my point of view and Lee's point of view, we talked about this, as long as you know what the right frequency for reporting is, that's the good thing to document. And then the last step is, what are those targets that are acceptable? And we'll show you a tool about percentage to target, which is a mindset of thinking about what you're trying to achieve.
I think you skipped the determine data collection and reporting responsibility.
I wasn't trying to read every single word.
Oh, okay. Well, I read it. You just need to make sure how you're going to collect the data over, what your methodology is and who's responsible for reporting it.
Right.
All right, Jim, you're back.
All right. So I talked about setting that target. And this comes from a nonprofit that dealt with soybeans. So it's not, it's not an analog to the city. But they had set a goal or target to achieve 600 bushels that they were, utilizing by a certain period of time. They were tracking how they were back in 2006, and they were showing some flattening. And then all of a sudden they started to see a big improvement. But they can still see that they weren't coming close to their 600 bushel target. And so that was what you would term as performance improvement gap, right? So understanding where you were and performing over a period of time, whether it's annually or quarterly, you want to know what that appropriate target is. One may say, well, maybe that was an unrealistic target, and that's a valid question to ask from reviewing the performance, but you still need to go through that process and say what's reasonable. Lee? Okay. So that nomenclature, again, we'll talk about the baseline is what is the current performance level from the most recent period. And this is one kind of way you can show that in terms of the baseline, averages that out, and then you have the raw data with the various spikes. The target is that performance you want to shoot for. And so as you can see on this particular bar graph, they're talking about the targets because they wanted to decrease whatever this was showing. And they were still, sometimes they were overachieving in that one period, but most of the time they were not hitting that target. They were over what they needed to do. If you had an external benchmark, here's another way of using a convenience of visualization by using the red, yellow, and green approach. Green meaning you're pretty good with where you want it to be compared to that benchmark. Yellow, you need to do some work, and you really need to focus on why you're in the red on these other two measures visualized here. Another way to show that is through those thresholds based on, say, in fire, where they have some national standards for response times and other kinds of things. You would set the green benchmark, meaning we want to be hitting that or coming close to that performance. And then it could be arbitrary, but in some cases it could be established by what's unacceptable, and you set the lower threshold. And in this graph, it shows over a period of time, they're doing better. And most recently, they're hitting their target and they're in a good level of performance, which they probably desire to maintain. Make sense? So the office or department needs to understand where they are. What's that historical data from your baseline? If you have external sources, you do that. And then you maintain a balance between challenging and realistic. I'm working with a client right now here in Washington, D.C., and they want to challenge themselves to achieve certain things, but most people get scary because they don't want to say that they failed. And so that's not the point of setting something challenging, but you want it to be realistic. You have to take in consideration also the time frame for you to hit that target. It may not be achievable in the next quarter, but it might be achievable in 3 years. And so you want to track that. And it's okay that you know that's when you want to do. You may want to set an intermediate target, knowing that if you want to achieve a certain level of performance and it's going to take you a long period of time, then for the next period, say for FY23 or FY24, set an intermediate target.
Yeah, Jim, I want to comment on that I think if you set a real stretch target and you're only making incremental progress toward it, it can almost be demotivating.
Correct.
So finding an intermediate point and saying, hey, if we can get to this level, that's really good. That is more motivating.
Exactly. And so those are the conversations I'm having this week with this current client when we're trying to set organizational measures of performance for next year. Next slide, Lee. All right. So we've included this in training. There's a methodology that was created by two Harvard professors back in 1996 called the Balanced Scorecard, which was really basically saying most organizations look at things from a rear view mirror of financial performance, right? But they said you need a balance. You need to look at things that might be leading indicators of organizational performance. So they really tried to focus on the one on the right-hand side, and learning and growth perspective, right? Things like, diversity, staff satisfaction, number of training hours. Those things would be leading indicators of either process performance improvements, which is on the next one to the right, impact on the customers in terms of their satisfaction, or the number of businesses that take plastic-free pledge that you're trying to do, say, for example, in Annapolis. And all those should help you with your financial performance. So we include this only because these are some of the measures we've seen other public entities have for their particular things. These are going to vary by what you're trying to achieve across the way. We show this approach to all the offices and departments just so they have an understanding of what some other municipalities and cities are doing.
And indeed, some of these are in use in Annapolis also.
Correct.
Right. So this is an example, I'll give Jim the credit, of that evaluation tool that we gave the departments. So we had the departments lay out their objectives and then propose different performance measures. And these were the measures that police used in the last cycle. And then a process to rate them in terms of, it could be yes or no, or on a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 scale, the validity, the value, the ease in tracking, the accountability. I mean, do they have influence over the performance measure? What kind of message does it communicate? Is it leading or lagging? And you'd get a score. So police would have, first of all, validated their objectives, maybe taken one out, put one in, whatever, and then brainstormed a number of potential measures and then rated them to give them scores to help them make the final selection. Jim, any other comments on this one?
No, so it was because as Lee mentioned, we had done our own assessment and then provided them what we thought they, how well they were doing in terms of identifying their performance measures. And it was a conversation. So for example, I mentioned about COVID impacting their second measure, the number of events hosted or attended in each ward. That was a big thing they wanted to try to achieve. And that was something that they're reporting 0 events when COVID hit, even though they were doing things like food drives and things like that. So that is something that they know they were overtaken by events because of COVID. But that helped them give a perspective of what they might be able to consider going forward. All right, so I'll walk you through this. So we talked about how you document. Ideally, this is a best practice, right? And not everyone we know is going through this process, but this is what we're suggesting. So this was a potential objective of one organization that said cultivate, retain a highly competent and motivated staff. So their key performance indicator was employee retention. They knew that their actual, was 72% of employees remain 5 years or more with the organization. They had determined the baseline was 70, and their benchmark that was a public standard for this particular organization was 60%. So they're doing pretty good. They set a target of 85%. So they want to go from 72 to 85%. And so what they did is they said, well, how do you calculate employee retention? So they took number of employees, which is the alias A, and they got it from the HR report, and they had the actual 98. And then they took the other variable, the number of employees employed greater than 5 years, alias B, also right off the HR report, was 71. And the calculation to what the employee retention KPI is, was you take B divided by A times 100, and you come up with the actual of 72. So this is what we recommend that everyone does with their performance measure. It helps you understand that it's valid. It helps you understand that they have a valid source, and you can see 85% might be considered a stretch, but if you adopt that mindset of percent to target, they're not that far off. And whether that was something they can do, so that creates the conversation: what activities do we need to do to increase our chances of moving from 72% to 85% of what we're setting as our target? Make sense?
And one of the ways that this documentation is helpful is, you have several new folks heading up departments, and in a couple of cases, they were confused or uninformed about what was being reported, how it was calculated. And if you had this kind of documentation, it would have been immediately obvious rather than a puzzle.
Yeah, one particular department was setting a target, their benchmark. Again, in their on your forms you had, they set a target, and it's like, well, wait a minute. So there's no way you can get there from there, because the numbers did not add up. Until we went through and walked through how you actually calculate that, they realized they're setting a totally unrealistic target, because they just couldn't move that needle anymore, because they're already achieving a certain level of performance. And that was the conversation to have, to get them rethink through those aspects. And so this is why it's really important to have this documentation. All right, here's a couple of visualization tools. Like I said, we have, what's your target, where you're tracking, what performance is unacceptable, which would be the red. And there's the website where you can see how you could do this. Some people might use, and I know this is something when you look at traffic fatalities and so forth, you can't really control that so much, but you want to know where you're doing and what stuff can you do. Here in Washington, D.C., we're all about vision zero from a pedestrian and bike kind of fatality, and it got worse in the pandemic, actually. So these are just some things. Want to go to the next slide, Lee?
Of course.
All right. So we talked about, now that you are doing a better job of selecting your measures and you're reporting on those, you want to move from measurement to management. You want to take over from here, Lee?
Sure. So measurement is collecting, analyzing, and reporting the information. Management is using that in a process to achieve what the big outcomes you desire as an organization. I mean, if it's a safer city, if it's cleaner water, if it's higher citizen satisfaction, those are the kind of overarching outcomes that your performance management system ought to be promoting. So the management system should wrap up all the organizational activities. So this is the point where each department and office's efforts come together, so that you're meeting those goals, strategic goals and objectives, whether they're explicitly in a plan or whether they're implied or understood, so that you're meeting them in an effective and efficient manner. And this comes straight out of the Association for Strategic Planning's body of knowledge that holds those performance measurement and performance management best practices. So again, we showed you the balanced scorecard, and across the city, this should apply to the financial side, the customer side, citizen side, the business management and processes side, and the people involved, right? It all gets wrapped up. So your data needs to be meaningful, needs to be understood. So when you receive information from performance measurement, you should be asking the questions, what does it tell us? Why is that is, and now what should we do? Right? It might be do more of the same. It might be, we've got a problem. We need to do something different. And look for correlations and cause-effect relationships among the data elements. Now, this can be, data science. It can be very sophisticated, or it can be pretty simple, just to say, hey, we're seeing the same thing from different departments, or it appears that COVID had these kind of effects citywide, for example, and then establish accountability to actually analyze the data, generate the reports, and organize the review meetings. We would suggest that on a quarterly basis, the audit committee and whomever else should be involved should be looking at this bigger picture. We suggest a little caution, though, just making decisions based on the data. I mean, the city is a political organization. You have to be concerned, or at least aware of, public judgments, public feelings. You have to, and I know you do, understand the impact of the things you might do on the citizens and the other stakeholders, the business community. There are governance issues. There are a lot of moving parts in city government, and given that, we're part of the county and state government is right here. External environment in general can have big influence over what you might do or might not do, just because data says you might do something. And also, not all data is perfect. It's incomplete. Some things you may think you have a good picture, but maybe it's not a full picture. Jim, do you want to add to this, or?
No, I think we should move to the next slide.
All right. Why don't you take this one on?
So, we talked about performance measurement activities, and these are the tasks for performance management. So first step is to measure, right? The next task, which we'll get to, is talk about learning, adapting, and then ongoing measurement. So you might have initiative status reporting. You may have objective performance reporting, which is what most of the training that we're talking about today. And if you had an overall strategy, you would be reporting on how you're doing towards achieving the strategic goals and objectives. Track, verify, communicate, analyze, evaluate, transform, as we said, and then making data-driven decisions, which is good. So that's what we talked about. Learning, adapting. This may be something new to you. So again, this also comes from Kaplan and Norton from Harvard. So there's a notion of single loop learning, like you take action, here's the results. So what we do, what we observe. Double loop learning says, all right, you still have the actions and results, but, what were the assumptions, what underlying those actions that you wanted to take? So you want to make sure that, why did we do that? And so you question, how you set those objectives for a particular department or office. And so you want to drive creativity and innovation by adapting to what's going on. As Lee said, the way that, and I put performance management at a glance of what we intended to happen. So that's the assumptions. What actually happened, which is the measurement, which are those results. Why did the results occur? Were they not what we expected? Going back and challenging why we said we wanted that to happen. what we intended to happen. So what? Okay, as Lee said, we continue doing what we're doing, or do we have to do something differently, which is now what do we do? And so that double loop learning helps you answer those those 5 key questions. What we needed, what we intended to happen, what actually happened, why did it happen? Is it okay? So what? And now what? And that's what we call use the do and review cycle, which I think is exactly this slide that I just talked about. And so if you're doing this on a quarterly basis, which the best practice organizations and municipalities I've worked with does, so you set your goals and measures, you still verify that you want to achieve that, you perform, you measure, you compare, are the results what you expected? No, you got to do something different, you got to fix that. But you also want to make sure, are your observations correct? Again, challenge those assumptions. Did you collect the data in the right way? Were there any issues with the collection of the data? Maybe some folks did not report, and so you need to take that into consideration to say what, why, so what, and now what. And this is a best practice that I've seen organizations across various industries at the state, very similar to what the federal government does and their performance management that the Office of Management and Budget sets. They have a more complicated diagram, but essentially they're looking at that same thing. And again, that double loop learning says, okay, what are those underlying assumptions that why we wanted to try to achieve a certain target.
This diagram's complicated enough, Jim. We don't need the Fed's version of it.
Yeah, I'm glad we took that out.
Okay.
Oh, and so the reason why it gets more complicated on the federal side is they have cross-agency goals, and you have that same thing too. So, multiple departments work together to address the overdose kind of situations. And so it's not only the emergency management, but it's police, it's fire, there's other folks, there's health, there's multiple organizations. So this process helps if you're trying to achieve something that multiple offices or departments in Annapolis are trying to achieve, because, like I said, it can get complicated with those shared objectives, or different players have different components to it. And this helps you understand and really track why something is not occurring that you want to occur. And then again, always take that lessons learned aspect. And then of course, you can always game the system, or you can have unintended consequences based on the measures that you set. And so you want to make sure that you don't have unintended consequences. I used to use a slide that was about bus routes, and it came from a British study that, the cartoon basically said, well, if we stopped at every, stop to pick up customers, we would never make the schedule. So the unintended consequence was people were not getting picked up because people thought that they had to meet the schedule, and that was not the real objective to meet. And
this is also an argument for multiple measures for
having
a specific objective. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so how can you assess a system? Well, first by the members of this committee and city council, whoever else is involved, articulating what you need in your role on the committee. And then, as we talked about, what is the ideal rhythm of evaluating the performance measures of the departments and offices? We're suggesting from your perspective, it probably should be quarterly. And then understanding if the city has systems and software that can yield the information needed and report on performance measures. So, and ideally that would be live data feeds. So, there's not a lot of manual tabulation and a lot of staff time taken to get what you need. But, sometimes you have to do that harder work. And then as Jim explained, using that double loop learning process, not just to say, well, here's what we did, here's what happened, but why? And are our assumptions right? And are we shooting at the wrong target or whatever? Best practices, alignment from citywide goals and objectives to department office goals and objectives. And as we said, it's fuzzy in Annapolis because, at least from what we have seen and understand, the citywide goals and objectives are not as explicit as we would suggest, and as the ASP body of knowledge on strategic planning and strategic management would want you to have. And then that automated support to the extent you can get it. And then, yeah, monthly, the departments and offices report. Quarterly, you would review the reports and assess and so on. And then an annual public reporting of performance, which I believe you do in some fashion now. And then an important observation, we would want you to have the flexibility to change targets based on actual performance and double loop learning. It makes little sense to us to keep chasing something that it's very clear over, that you understand all of a sudden or over time that you're not going to reach, or that is not the correct target. So we suggest having some flexibility to change mid-course rather than wait till the end of it.
Or when something occurs like COVID-19 that cancels
Yes.
out in-person events and so forth,
Yes,
bother reporting on that, report on something else.
right, exactly. So what questions should you be asking? The automated data feeds question, the visualization, yeah, we can get numeric reports and so on, but is there a way to make this more vivid, more tangible, more understandable? Ability to change targets as needed, and ability to analyze period over period and track over time. Some of these things you want long-term trending, and you want to be able to see that trend. We've added at the end of this, it's a terminology appendix but we're not going to review the terms. I think we actually have reviewed the terms in the presentation. Okay, I'm going to leave the presentation up for a moment, just in case you want me to go back to a different slide, but we are finished. And Fred, I don't know how we're doing on time, but we certainly welcome any questions that the committee and others might have.
We have plenty of time.
We see a question, a hand's raised.
Okay, I can't see anything but your,
Would you like me to get out of this? I'm happy to.
well, yeah, okay. Ellie,
Oh, wow, I'm first. I didn't expect that. Okay, a couple of things. Well, not really, maybe several, a couple comments and then some questions. First, I'm glad I heard of the fat finger error. I never heard that before. That was, and as far as an overall comment, in evaluating overall, what are a naive question? What are we? Are we a public service? Are we a government entity? I just need to know that in providing services. What are we labeled as? I assume it's public service.
Well, you're a government entity providing public service is the way I would put it, right?
We should know that. I guess that's what I would say. So, okay, because that's important to know. We offer public services. So when you talk about visceral response, et cetera. My second comment is this is huge. And I say that because in watching the Finance Committee and our efforts the last several years, I've always been frustrated in that we have a department presentations and we've ended at the so what. You know what I mean? We've ended at the so what. we're nowhere else to go. And we have all of this information presented by the departments, and we don't know what to do with it. And I think that's what you observed in your initial, in interviews and evaluations. So this is a real paradigm shift, and it's a paradigm shift for me as well, coming from the construction industry, because we would focus more on efficiency, miles of road and da 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 da. Which brings me to my first question: how does efficiency weigh into this? How does evaluating efficiency, for example, real life example, we're presented with miles of roads paved. How do you translate that achievement into a measurable, something measurable, not measurable, but you know what I mean? I don't hear the word efficiency, evaluating efficiency in your presentation.
Well, if you remember, we talked about different kinds of measures. Efficiency measures do matter.
Not mine.
Because if
Not
you
my
are, if you are very inefficient in paving those roads, you're basically wasting resources, right?
Right.
So you would want to know, but there's also the question of effectiveness. When in the dark ages, when I took my course in strategy at the University of Chicago, the professor talked about the World War II bomber wing that flew in perfect order, dropped their bombs, and destroyed the supposed target. Very, very efficient, very effective. Unfortunately, it was the wrong target. So just because you're efficient doesn't mean what you're producing is the best or most useful product or service. So it's part of the picture. Jim?
It
you have to
ties
have a
into,
balance, right?
Right.
So like and you've outsourced some of your transit services, right? Some of your parking services. And so you want to know from an efficiency standpoint, how efficient are they doing that? So there's a dollar kind of denominator you want to be looking at, right? And your example about number of miles of roads paved, how much was it? The efficiency would be looking at, okay, last year we paved, I'm making this up, 20 miles of new roads paved, and it cost us X dollars. This year it was X dollars plus, so we got less efficient. Why was that the case? Because of all the prices are going up, right? In COVID. So yeah, you do want to have efficiency measures if it's important to the city. That's where it comes out. What are you really trying to achieve? So ask those questions, and then some of those departments, from, say uptime, we got into the discussion with the IT folks about if they move things to the cloud, would that reduce the energy footprint of the IT department? And they can actually track that. So that's an efficiency measure they don't have set, but they can actually do that, which might be something Annapolis might want to try to achieve.
which ties into my last question, where all of this does tie into what are our overall strategies or goals, using what we just talked about, how does, paving roads tie into a objective strategy? It could be, increase revenue as a strategy, which I would say is number one. Who is the gatekeeper of those goals and strategies? So that this is a living and breathing document that is high priority instead of just some overall study on a shelf somewhere.
Right.
Who establishes these overall?
So with the other entities with which I've worked over many years, it is a shared responsibility between the mayor, using Annapolis terms, between the mayor, the council, and the staff. I mean, basically, it's not going to work if you don't have buy-in among that group. Obviously, the city council has a decision-making process, and the mayor plays that important role. And David deploys and manages the staff. So you can isolate individuals, but you really want a consensus.
Does your contract help us with that?
Not the current contract, no.
Okay, good to know. Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.
You're on mute.
Ms. George.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both of our presenters today. What fabulous work. As a former SME in performance measures, this makes me very happy to hear all of this. And I think it does such a good job of getting us ready to improve our processes across the city. And I think the initial slide, something about you can't improve what you can't measure. And we're very grateful, frankly, to you all for bringing this forward. It's certainly exceeded my expectations in terms of what you all were able to accomplish with not much budget. I do have a couple of questions. First of all, you showed the slide that you would have used with the police department and using those different elements to evaluate a measure. If we had a citywide strategic plan, would one of those attributes be how does your measure conform with or serve the citywide strategic plan?
Yes.
Okay. So, and I would assume that you advocate for us having a citywide strategic plan.
Double yes.
Okay, great.
Whether it's us or someone else you engage to create it.
Right. And then a more kind of down in the weeds or grasses question. Seasonality. Obviously, some activities occur more, I'm thinking of Recreation and Parks Department, where, their big activities occur in the summer. So is there a need to consider seasonality in the reporting process? Like, do you try to smooth the data to accommodate seasonality, or do you just not worry about that?
You could smooth it. You could compare it to that same quarter in past years. So you wouldn't actually be smoothing it. You just break it down finer.
Right.
And Jim, I think you were going to talk.
No, that's what I was going to say, right? So if same thing for like snow removal kinds of things that you're looking at, right? You're not going to be measuring that in July, right? But you may not even be measuring that in January anymore with snow, right? So yeah, you have to take that in consideration.
Okay.
And again, if there is the ability to set specific, so like in Parks and Recs, you'd probably be looking at things on a daily basis to manage, right? Whether things are safe, the facilities are clean, trash is picked up, people are getting, they're signing up for activities. So yeah, you have to take that into consideration for sure.
Thank you. And one final question, outcome measures, because at the end of the day, that's what I guess we all care about. What does it matter what we do?
Right.
So would you say, are you comfortable that all departments have an adequate number of outcome measures at this time, or is there still work to do in that regard?
Still work to do.
Still work to do, but don't feel bad. You could say that about many, many organizations.
For sure.
Alderman Payon, I noticed that Alderman Arnett held up that strategic plan we mentioned last time. And I think we observed that was really never enacted and isn't being pursued now. I just wanted to comment on that.
Well, perhaps Alderman Arnett can answer that.
Yeah, it is actually a very decent strategic plan, and it also had a citizen survey that was designed to measure satisfaction outcomes for the people we serve. The reason, I think there were two reasons that this never got off the ground. One is because it never really got to the city council. We weren't part of the development. But two, and I think more important, and one of the things that I think we need to worry about, This was developed 2 administrations ago, and towards the end of that administration, and that administration didn't make it back. They didn't return. And so I think another liability we have is this continual change at the top. So my question is, I know I'm a lifelong bureaucrat. I know bureaucracy moves along with its own inertia, but how do we make these overall strategic goals that give each of the departments something to fold into? How do we make that survive from one administration to the next?
So it can be a difficult thing. I'm working with another municipality, and previously I've worked with a different municipality where they try to make their planning cycle a 4-year cycle. And it's easier said than done, but on the transition, pulling in the past, the current, and maybe the future folks to invest in that plan. So part of it's timing, part of it's making sure you're as inclusive as you can be within bounds of who participates. So there's some understanding of the why and the what. And also key in this, I hate to put the burden on David and Lynn, but it would be for the staff heads to kind of be some of that glue to push it forward.
I was going to say, I was just,
go ahead, Jim, go ahead.
I was just going to say at the federal level, this is, and I've seen this for the last 20 years, helping different administrations set things. What they tend to do, because they have things set in law, right? There's some things that haven't changed in over 100 years. They have to go and do the fish survey in Ketchikan, Alaska twice a year, and they've been doing it for over 100 years. So there's some things that will always be part of anything. What changes is what they call at the federal level, the president's management agenda. And that is always supposed to be implemented by the political appointees that come in to the administration. And yet you still have to keep the lights on, and you still have activities that are going on. The last administration had a difficult time with getting the staff to adopt that president's management agenda for various reasons. And so it's important, as Lee said, to bring those parties together, whether it's the mayor, the council, and the staff, to make sure that those little, it's not going to be radical changes, perhaps. Maybe, the world is different than it was in 2012, I would posit. And so you have to take in current environment things into account and to build that plan.
You also do not set up, in best practices, you don't set a plan for whatever period, 4 years, and then just run it. You should annually assess, tweak,
Correct.
Make sure it's current and useful and helpful.
And you're serving the needs of the citizens and the businesses that are operating within the city.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Alderwoman Pendel Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everyone. This has been extraordinary. I'll start with that statement. I've never seen a presentation like this. But anyway, I'm going to kind of try to tie a bow into what everybody has said and asked so far. I'm probably coming into this position as an alderperson, the least political person. I'm very strategic in what I do, and this is wonderful, but politics is in everything. I'm just going to say it and put it out there. And every administration is going to come in with their plan or goals or objectives or whatever it is. And I'm glad Alderman Arnett brought that book along, because it's been 2 administrations ago. And we've got 4 working government entities in this town: city, county, state, and federal, because we have the United States Naval Academy. And much of what you said is baseline and should be followed, no doubt about it. But any administration that comes in, like I said, is going to have their own plan. And some of whatever they do can be, for lack of a better term, washed away by legislation. You get a new city council, you get a new mayor, and if people don't subscribe to this, then it's very difficult to implement. You spend half your time trying to get folks to understand and do it. Now, I see the total benefit in it. And I think there are ways that there's some baseline ways that you can continue with doing it no matter what administration it is. But there are going to be nuances along the way, big ones or small ones. The other thing is too, if you look at every ward is totally different. Every need, and I'll bring up a good example right here and now. We all see the benefits of having outdoor dining and keeping the recovery zones until November 1st. Alderwoman Tierney in Ward 1, no doubt about it, the residents want it. I mean, are somewhat adverse to it because it affects retail. You look at Alderman Arnett's ward in Ward 8, they want it. They have a couple of restaurants and it really has thrived. And so you're looking at two different wards that have two different thought processes and visualizations when it comes to a piece of legislation that on most accounts would say is beneficial, but you've got the residents who in many ways are driving the train. And so when you're looking at these benchmarks and goals and objectives, and I love them, I think they're great. But when you drill it down to wards, it becomes a little more complicated. And I'll even say this, I've got about 12, I'll call neighborhoods or enclaves within my ward of 5,000 residents. And every one of those are totally different. Totally, each one of them. And so when you start drilling down, it becomes difficult, but we need to find a way of using what you've given us, at least from a baseline standpoint, to see if it can work over all wards, any administration. That's the tough part about all of this. And like you said, you've worked with other municipalities before. We're the seat of the state, the county. So I'd like to think we're unique, which makes it a little more difficult. But some of these things can be done away with either the mayor, the council, legislation, with incoming administrations or outgoing administrations. So it does make it a lot more challenging.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Alderwoman Tierney.
Yeah, thank you. A little in my hand here. I thought that Alderwoman Pindle Charles brought up a great example of why we need an overall strategy or goal. Looking, I try to say that we're extending the outside dining to November 1st, that what she was talking about. And she brought up how that means different things to different wards. But if we have an overall strategy, look at what is the overall good? What are we trying to accomplish overall? The short term, I think with the strength of the pandemic, we obviously would have had to introduce some short-term goals, and that was namely survival. And then a long-term goal is, how will this benefit the city? I think that her example definitely demonstrated the reason why we need an overall strategic goal. And I do have a question in this. In that, do we have short-term and long-term? So that if in the transfer of administrations, those long-term goals are constant as much as they can be?
Yeah, plans as we know them have a vision and obviously a mission, and then have strategic goals and strategies to achieve them. And those are very high level. You might have 3, 4, 5, but then under that, you would have an annual work plan, basically. in, okay, what are we going to do in this period to push down the road toward achievement of that goal? So a new administration comes in, as long as you're buying into the overall big picture strategies, clean water, healthy citizens, whatever they are, then the work plan might change. But in theory, you can keep those revalidated goals in place.
X is your North Star. But again, you need to have that buy-in that you're trying to achieve that. I mean, it's something came radically, some radical kind of new strategy or goal, you know, you've got a process to debate that publicly, right? And bring the citizens in, bring the different stakeholders in. You know, I don't know how much the businesses provided input for. It's not only just customer or citizen surveys, but, you know, with the businesses or prospective businesses, or, you know, the views of the other stakeholders at the state, and, you know, how was the, you know, how was the academy brought in? So there are a lot of those kind of stakeholders you need to think through on who to involve and when.
Well, that's what is great about having this, is that it gets us away from this, you know, stakeholder / self-interest versus an overall, you know, visceral goal. As you mentioned, an example on these recovery zones is the health of our city. You know, that's a big one. So yeah, again, it does reiterate having these long-term goals. You know, economic health, big one.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, David.
Fred, yeah, if I could just comment. First of all, I want to thank Jim and Lee. They did an absolutely superb job on this engagement, and they won the departments over. And, you know, the departments are a little bit skeptical of all of this and what it's going to be used for and how much additional work it might be. But they won the departments over, so I appreciate that. I just wanted to ask one question, and that has to do with, you know, we were talking about paving of streets, and for streets, the correct performance measure is the pavement condition index. It's a well-known way to measure the quality and the condition of the streets, but it's very long-term in nature, right? So it's not like you can make really sizable changes each year. No matter how much work you do, it's kind of a slow movement. So I'm just interested in Lee and Jim's thoughts about that. So, you know, we have 90 miles of streets. We pave about 3 miles per year. So we improve about 3 miles, but at that same time each year, the streets degrade a little bit. The useful life of pavement is about 20 years. So, and we only measure the pavement condition index about every 4 years. We do a complete inspection of all of our streets and come up with a new measure for that. So for something like that, what's your recommendation on how we should show the public that we're actually making an improvement to the streets when that pavement condition index is changing very little each year?
Right, because that's the challenge with visualization, right? If you can show, you know, you can change the scale, right? So you could, if you play with the numbers, you can change the scale of what you show, right? So if you want to show that you're always doing improvement, but you have a lot of things you can't control with that, right? As weather gets hotter, as things happen, as trucks come through and fall over, there's a lot of things that go into, you know, the condition of a roadway. And so you have to take in those considerations into effect as well. So what is the best thing for you to control? And you're using a standard, right, that other municipalities and other entities use. So yeah, I understand the challenge of showing that. Maybe you need to rethink, you know, I don't know if there's other municipalities that are measuring that on a more frequent basis than every 4 years. That sounds about right to me. And that's something that if it becomes really important to the citizens or the business owners, then you may want to rethink how frequently you do that and how to show that.
So I think there's a clue in what Jim said. If other cities are doing the pavement condition index, and I know I've worked with cities that use it, if you can get aggregated data on the average condition of roads elsewhere and show how Annapolis is better off than the typical community, if indeed that's true. Right there, you're communicating a positive message. If it isn't better off, maybe that's a time for some soul searching about resources. You know, that's where your performance management system might say, we got to figure out how to improve more road over time if we're going to move the needle. So some of it is not what you show, but rethinking what you do, I think.
Yeah, I had an experience last year. I was on a panel for the K-Fritz Awards, which is the K-Fritz Foundation gives out to the city employees here in Washington, D.C., the staff as well as at the department level. And the Department of Public Works put a proposal in saying how well they're doing in terms of repaving all the roads in the city. And it sounded good on paper, but if you did a calculation of the total roads that they had control over, meaning not National Park Service roads, they only did about 10%. And so I said to them, I was like, great, keep it up, because I'm a citizen, I'm benefiting from better roads. But come back when it's, you know, something more meaningful as an outcome versus just 10% of the roads that you improved. And they're actually doing that.
Okay, are there any other questions?
Yeah, we have three, I think, Jim, then me, then Lynn, but I'll defer to Lynn since she hadn't had a chance, but I'm looking at the hands. Jim, then Lynn, then me.
Okay. Madam Chair.
You can't see, I thought you said.
No,
Thanks. I
you
think
guys were all on
Alderwoman Pindell
page
Charles
2.
was ahead of me. Thank
No,
you.
go ahead, Jim, because
Thank
I've
you for
talked,
yielding.
so you go ahead.
Thank you for yielding. Lee and Jim, thank you very much for this presentation. This is really informative. And I really think that the audit committee will learn a lot from this. And I guess in our role as the monitors of this over time, you know, on a periodic basis, we'll be monitoring the successful implementation and integration into city management. One of the questions I had was with regards to the measurement aspects, do you see significant gaps in what department heads want to measure and what our systems are currently capturing that they're measuring?
Excellent.
Yes, because you know, some of the big picture things, the data is not available, or at least readily available. Just take clean water. Yeah, you've got measures of water quality, but disaggregating what are the inputs into that water quality and how do you measure it and manage it, that can be very difficult.
Well, I think for something like water quality, though, the annual water quality report is a significant benchmark, is a sufficient benchmark. I don't know if you need more than that. I'm looking for, are there departments where department heads either want to measure certain things or should be measuring things, but the responses that you're receiving back from the department head is, we don't capture that and we don't have the systems to capture that?
There are a few examples where in our conversations with the department heads, that gave them some pause to rethink what they should really be saying they want to measure. And then the second question they have is, where can we get the data? And I think some of the departments are working through that process. So they're not there right now, Jim, but they are now. We've observed that they're rethinking that, especially in the case of the folks that called us back to help them with the next round of measures. The tool helped them to understand what they can and can't do, especially those first two questions. Do you have the data? Is it valid? And does it give you valuable information for managing your department or your office? And if no, then they just stop right there. So that tool in itself helps them get that.
Yeah, I would say you're in mid-process in a number of departments, meaning before there were cases where people were measuring what was easy to measure and what they had data on, and they weren't necessarily focused as much on the big picture outcomes.
Right.
Now they're focused more on the big picture outcomes. So the next question is then, well, what should we be measuring and where do we get the data? So I think people are in transition on that, Jim.
Yeah. And we know some departments, even if they didn't want to track or they didn't have control over the measure, they still have to do it because it's standard for their particular field. And fire is a good example in terms of, the wait time, the transition time for pulling in a patient, and when they give it over to, the medical facility, they have no control what's going on inside that medical facility, but yet they still have to track that because it's important for their particular industry.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Lynn, did you have a question?
I didn't have a question, and I will defer to the Alderwoman if she does have a question, because I just have a comment I want to make at the end, or once everyone has gotten their questions answered.
Okay.
I just want to make a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple comments. I mean, I hate to keep bringing it up, but the political side of this gnaws at us. And we all know we've got certain vocal residents. And if they scream and holler enough, there's a relenting, and you kind of throw, I won't say the objective out of the window, but it happens. I mean, we know that certain wards are going to come out en masse for certain things, and there's going to be some political pressure applied. I have just went through a cannabis legislation, and my residents were extremely vocal about it. It didn't matter what the end game may be, sort of, or what the analogy was, but the optics of it, they just didn't want it. And in many ways, we do have to look at what our residents do and don't want, even if there's some strategy or goal in place. I mean, I'm reluctant to say it, but anybody in political office who's running again wants the support of their residents. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not saying we should kowtow or bow down to what we believe is on strategically in place. I do believe in strategy and goals, and don't get me wrong, I'm all for it. But in some ways, it does hamper us when it comes to certain residents and certain complaints and certain requirements and some requests that it's sometimes just saying, okay, can we fit it in a goal or objective? Probably so. But the political part of this brings pause to anything that we do. And I'm not saying that's what we do, but in certain cases, whoever comes out the loudest gets heard the most. I'm just putting a realistic twist on what you're doing. I think it's great. I'll keep going back to that. We definitely need to do this, no doubt about it. But taking that component into consideration needs to be said, if nobody else will say it. Mr. Gerald, I think, wants to respond.
Gerald?
Yeah, I had a similar experience that Alderwoman Pindell Charles is talking about when I was in San Diego. We hired a large consulting firm. It was a national firm, Grant Thornton, to help us put together a performance management system. And it was beautiful. We spent a year doing it, and it was just beautiful when we finished. But it's so hyper political in San Diego that when we started collecting data and things weren't quite perfect, like nothing's ever quite perfect. So some of the departments didn't come up to what our expectations were. So the mayor refused to release any of the data because he felt like he would be criticized more for not quite coming up to standards than he was for not reporting the results. So that definitely happens, and these things can be very political if the numbers aren't quite where we would hope they would be.
So when was last time went to performance.gov, right? So at the federal level, there's a website to put all the performance information for every agency and office at a cabinet level out there. And when I went on in February, there was nothing there because they didn't do the transition from, past administration to the new one. But there is a way to do that. And, some cities have, there used to be city stat and some people do that, but you're absolutely right, Mr. Gerald, that is very political, and the inability to release data, it's political, but, we always aim on the side of transparency if you can.
Yeah, Alderman Pindell Charles, what you're talking about is a reason why the best practices in strategic planning want you to have an awful lot of stakeholder input to really mine what the community overall thinks and visualizes and wants. And a part of that process, you're actually educating the residents a bit about the city's needs and challenges and opportunities. But a big part of the process before you sit down and plan is getting all that stakeholder input. Because otherwise,
And I go
it's
back to
not
the
going to go
different
anywhere.
wards, Ward 1 and Ward 8, and about the outdoor dining. That's the most stark example I've seen lately of all the emails we've gotten from 1 and 8. It's totally different. And so there's a dilemma there. In my mind, it's a dilemma. Now, the aldermen that all the persons that represent those wards may not see it that way, but I see it as a dilemma. And citywide, when you're looking at it citywide, as Alderwoman Tierney said, it's the health and welfare of the entire city. But then when you have a group of residents who's saying, it's affecting us, the retail, and the restaurants are fine, then you got to find a way to let the retailers know that we have your best interests at heart. Are you coming in and promoting people eating, but also coming to your establishment? I mean, it's a fine line as to how you handle that. And so, and we're just talking about 2 separate wards. And like I said, my ward, each neighborhood is totally different. So when you start nuancing, and part of that is everybody is living close together. Anything that affects, 2 doors down the street is going to affect you. And unlike maybe in the county, it's more spread out and all of that. So it is very odd. I guess it's the best word for it, but I said enough. Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. George, and by the way, Ms. Charles, can I ask you to take over the meeting just for a moment or two? I've got to step away.
For a moment or two, because I have to be out of here at 4:15, but thank you. I will.
Be less than 5.
I know Lynn. Okay, that's fine. Lynn had her hand up and she wants to say something. Lynn, did you want to go before Katie?
Well, I just noticed that we're almost over time, so I'll make my one comment very short, and that is, I just wanted to reiterate what the city manager said, and in that the departments found the work with Forest Consulting very valuable. But I do feel like we're in the middle of this process, and we started in the middle instead of starting at the beginning. And that I hope that the audit committee, the council, and the finance committee will all give serious thought to starting the process at the strategic planning level. I think that the departments have done a great deal of work, and I think it'll be helpful even in that strategic planning process. But I do hope that we will quote unquote do it the right way, and develop the strategic plan, and then have the departments rework their goals and objectives based on the priorities. The other part that makes this really an ideal time is that we have this citizen survey budgeted for this year as well. And so we can really hear from our residents on what's important to them. So, and I do recommend working with Forest Consulting. I mean, I have to be transparent. I worked with them when I was a board member at Maryland Hall, and they did a phenomenal job with that organization, have worked with a number of local organizations. So they know our city, and they know, a lot of aspects of the city, and Lee does live here. So I'm done now. Thank you.
Thank you. And I apologize, Ms. Farrow and Ms. George. Excuse me for calling you by your first names.
It's fine.
Yes, Ms. George.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. As a resident of Ward 8, I'd like to weigh in a bit on what Alderwoman Pendle Charles spoke of. I do believe that certain voices are the ones that always get heard, but I think it's incumbent on all of us to increase voter and citizen engagement. If people are not going to participate, then the few loud voices are the ones that are going to be heard. And I think it's important that we reach out to every citizen, every resident, every business owner, not just those who are represented by the various resident civic associations, but there are lots of folks who don't belong to civic associations that are still residents of Annapolis, and those voices need to be heard. And my theory is that when we expand engagement across all citizen groups, then those loud voices become a little less loud because there are more voices participating. Now, that's just my theory. I haven't fully tested that out, but I'd like to believe that that would happen. And I think it's for all of us as citizens of Annapolis. I think we need to make sure that everybody is participating. All we have to do is look at the numbers of people that dial in for our Zooms, even for city council meetings. It's not very high. People are not engaged. And we all, those of us who serve on boards and commissions, have the opportunity to change that. So I'm done too.
Well, thank you very much, Alderwoman Pendle Charles. And we're going to have to move along. We've certainly we're running on overtime at this point. If you have any more questions.
I think Alderwoman Tierney had a comment or question, but
yes,
you're the chair.
I see your hand up. Go ahead if you can make it quick, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that was a big lesson that I learned in my first year as being alderwoman, is that the voices that you hear sometimes are the negative ones, and you have
sometimes.
And we have a vehicle for those few to have input into their respective associations as well. We look at the downtown merchants, we look at that association, we look at the Maryland, State Circle Association, and sometimes those voices, they don't choose to be part of that association, and so that their voices can be heard separately like that. So I just want to make it clear that we have to reach out, as Ms. George said, to others and just make sure that isn't the only voice. Does that make sense?
All right. Well, thank you very much, Lee and Jim. Certainly enjoyed the presentation. Hey, I put my pen down after the first 10 minutes and just was focused on the presentation itself. I thought it was excellent. Thank you for coming down, and apologies for not being able to hear you last month as we had scheduled.
It worked out just fine, Alderman Payon. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lee and Jim, both.
All right, we'll sign off now.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
We are running way behind this morning. We do have one matter under old business that is rather pressing in nature. Jody, can you talk about the appointment of an external audit firm for fiscal year 2021?
Yes, it's one of the charges given to the audit committee is retaining the auditors to conduct the annual audit. And we still don't have one formally appointed for 21. And as you know, that should be underway right now, but they're still finishing up the single audit work for 20. And I asked them for an engagement letter so they could state a fee for 21. And they quoted the fee of 85,000, which is the same fee that they quoted for FY20.
How
So
much? How much did you say?
85,000,
Okay.
which sounds like a big number, but it's lower than it was when I started because we took the financial statements back in hand and started doing them internally. So we saved a significant amount there. I think it used to be a little over 100,000. So,
All right. Go
so
ahead.
the committee is in charge of appointing this. If we don't retain them, we'll have to get another firm. My hope is that if I can get an assistant in place, I can do an RFP in the fall for the FY22 audit, because I think it's important every few years to put it out for bid. And it's been many years since we've had the same firm.
Well,
There's a question.
what are your comments about how, what kind of job they've been doing?
So I enjoy working with them. They're very knowledgeable. This last year was a bit of a test because they were doing all their audit work virtually, and we had some staff turnover on their side as well. So at the end, it got to be a little bit of a push, and for both sides, they would ask for things and we would be late to respond, and then we would ask for things and they would be late to respond. So I think we both had a little bit of a test this past year, but all in all, I enjoy working with them. We had a new partner this year. Our former partner retired, and so we worked with Sean Walker this year, which went fine. Of course, it's virtual, so it's a little different, only seeing him on a screen and having meetings on the screen. So it's my opinion that I would like to work with them one more year, and not that I think that it's the RFP process is important because I'm not happy with their work. It's just that you have to put it out for bid every once in a while and see if you're still at market rate, and if there's other firms that have entered the market that could be competitive with them.
This has not been put out to RFP, presumably.
For many years. I think that CLA has been doing this audit at least 10 years, maybe 8 to 10 years. They have to go back, but they were in place a long time before I came on board.
All right, Ms. George?
I believe it's still best practice to change out every 5 years your audit firm. But do you feel that since you at least have a new partner on the team now, that you've achieved a certain bit of professional distance that mitigates against that rule?
Yeah, in my professional opinion, I would say 5 years is a little too soon to change, because there's a big learning curve at the beginning. There's a lot of time that goes in the first year of an audit for the new firm to learn your systems. So 5 years, I'm not sure that would allow for the productivity of that first year. But I feel that changing partners every few years helps, because then you get a different perspective. After a while, you have a tendency to always focus on the same things and always think everything's fine because you did it the year before. You get a new set of eyes on things, and the new partner, the new staff will find something else that you need to work on. So I would recommend that we change partners occasionally. Now, the partner that we had before was great. I love working with him. I think he was on it for many, many, many years.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Jim, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry.
I would go to Alderwoman Tierney first.
Just a comment that, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think a comment too that we should consider is that we are undertaking for the first time a really substantial P3 project, which involves financial considerations, and I think that continuity in that light is very advantageous.
There are a lot of very specific and complex accounting decisions that have to be made once we have the final PPP agreement. And that will be later on, either this summer, early fall, we'll have everything established on what we're going to do. And then with that, we have some complex accounting decisions to go through on our end. So yes, to get that in place, they would have the experience. They're a very experienced firm, and then we can walk through that with them.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Jim? Mr. Carpillo, excuse me.
Thanks, that's fine. I've been called worse. So what we're presented with is one engagement letter with one firm that we either accept or reject, and then we're kind of in a bad position because we don't have an audit firm engaged for the June 30, 2021 year. And I appreciate that that they've trimmed the fee for 21, which is great. So I think it's almost like our task here is to rubber stamp this, but to begin the steps toward an RFP for the 22 audit. Am I correct? Is that where we are?
That's my understanding, but Ms. Dickinson can probably answer better than
Well, I would suggest the audit committee should consider how often you want to change firms and how often you want to change partners. And you might want to put that down in some formal action.
Okay,
Because
well,
right now we've been a couple of decades with the same firm. So,
and
the
the
audit
mean we're
committee,
going to go with a new one.
and the audit committee's only been in existence for 2-3 years now. So it's a fairly new board, but you probably should set down in writing what you want as far as audit attention. And we can get you some information on best practices on auditors and how often they should turn over and change partners, that kind of thing.
Is this something we have to vote on today?
So if you want them to start an audit process on FY21, yes, but if you waited and you don't meet in August, then it would be September before they're appointed. So that would just push back the start of the audit process.
Okay, Gesundheit.
So I don't recall having, I'd have to go back and look at minutes, but in previous years, did we actually accept the engagement letter from CLA in previous years?
So we did talk about it last year, and you made the decision last year. The year before, that would have been the first time I would have been doing it. I think you did each year.
Okay.
I try to remember to bring it to you.
Okay.
And both times we were staying with the same firm, but
Okay.
we do need to get out and do an RFP.
I have to be honest, Jim, I have no recollection of dealing with this issue in the past, but.
All right. Well, it looks like to me we have a path forward. So I think we should just call the question and vote on the engagement letter.
Okay, the question's been called. Anything anybody would like to say before we vote? I'll bring it to a vote. What is their name again?
CLA. It's initial CLA, Clifton Larson Allen.
Yes. All in favor of retaining CLA for one more year as the city auditor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, say nay. Looks like we have unanimously agreed to keep CLA for one more year, at least. Is there anything else you need in that regard, Ms. Dickinson?
No, that's it for me.
All right.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
I don't know that you have a vote on moving to the RFP, or if you need one, but you want to probably give finance director some direction regarding that.
Yes, and if you were going to mandate RFPs or a timing on how often you wanted to switch auditors, you might want to do a little research first on that. But as far as what the city attorney said, if you want to direct me to do an RFP for this next year, that's probably some action you should take now, because that'll be in the fall. We'll have to start that process in the fall.
Do I hear a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second,
Thank you.
Any discussion? Well, I think that that would be probably a prudent move on our part based on the discussions we've had in the last few minutes. To tell you the truth, I hesitate to rubber stamp, because that's what we've done, CLA for this year, but I get it that, you know, we're a little bit late to the ball game to hire somebody else. And besides, from what I can tell, they've done a pretty good job. So I think I would ask that the finance director then, oh, wait a minute, did I take the vote? Yeah, did I take the vote?
Need to take the vote, sir.
Okay. All in favor of directing the finance director to begin the RFP process for new auditor for an auditor for next year, fiscal 2022. Please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. I believe we have unanimously approved the motion. Reports, I'm going to defer those until our next meeting. It's going on 10 o'clock and we've got to move on. Do I hear any motions at this point?
Mr. Chair, if I might. Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I thought that I saw something on Old Business Open Meetings Act training discussion. When one of the reasons why I jumped on, I was wondering if you needed me to say anything or discuss anything at this point regarding that, or do you want to put that to next meeting?
Why don't we do that till keep that till the next meeting?
Sure.
Mr. Cardillo.
I'm sorry, just a quick question for Mr. Lyles. What's the next date? The Open Meetings Act can be done individually, right? If I recall. The person can complete the training on their own.
Sure,
All
yes.
right. Thank you, we'll defer. Thank you.
Julia's already, Ms. Donnelly's already taken the course in behalf of our committee, but hey, the more the merrier, I think. If Jim, you want to take it, it's fine by us, and now we'll have two qualified if you do.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's been moved. Any second?
Second.
Seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed can sit here for the rest of the day. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. As of now, we do not have an August meeting. We will be meeting on September, I believe it's September 20th. I don't have September 20th, 8 o'clock. Oh, quickly before we go. Anybody want to start going to City Hall or to the Pitt Moyer Center instead of doing this remotely?
Let's kick that can down to the September meeting.
Okay.
Let's not make a decision now.
If somebody in the administration tells me that we have to have it at City Hall or we have to have it live in person, then that's the way it is, but I will certainly inform you.
Thank you.
All right.